very compelling. There are a lot of elements. One, I love your deep character development. You also have lots of conflict and there's plenty of outside pressures that sort of drive the story. You know, the character gets himself in a lot of different situations. So it's gritty, it's suspenseful. But I think another thing that I believe it's also very soulful. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that it's set in the South. And
Hmm.
my feeling is that, you know, books that are set in the South have a soul like no other. And I want to talk to you a lot about, there's so many things I want to talk about with you tonight, but I thought I would start with this soulful aspect and ask you to comment a little bit about your thoughts on that and, you know, the place of this in American storytelling.
Thank you. I'm going to talk fast because we're having some snow out here in southeastern Virginia. I know it's crazy to have snow in the south, so hopefully my signal won't interrupt our conversation. But I think works that originate in the south have, like you said, a soul. They carry the shadow of a complex history, and I think that those works um, not to the detriment or to denigrate any other works that are set anywhere else, but there is a uniqueness, a specificity to the South and Southern stories that I think readers can identify regardless of where they're from. Um, the history of the South is the history of America. And when you talk about stories that are either set during the New South era, or whether you talk about stories that are set in the post antebellum period or stories that are set in the early part of the 20th century. The South is the mother of all the other states. And I think that as a writer originally born and bred from the South, um, I was able, I tried to articulate my own interpretations of the complexity of that history. And so, regardless of whether I'm writing a crime novel or a short story or a mystery story, the elements that make the South unique always seem to find their way into my writing.
Yeah, I really appreciated that as I was reading your story. But I want to get into your characters. Okay, you really do. I felt like your characters are well developed. They've got so much going on in them. And of course, Beauregard, the main character in the story, let's talk about him first. He's got, you know, he's very two sided, maybe many sided. He's a man who faces some really difficult decisions. He's got to decide whether he's going to be good or go the evil route. On one hand, he's this very loving husband. He's dedicated to being a father. He wants to be fair in his business. I mean, he's got a lot of things going on. But on the other side of him is this past of criminal activity and his ability to access violence on the turn of a dime. So, talk to me a bit about who Beauregard is and how you, as his author, came to know him.
I'm fascinated by ideas and questions about identity, about nurture versus nature, about the id versus the superego, about who we are, who we want to be, and who we can be. And so with Beauregard, he was a character that originally uh, uh, was created for a short story, and he was so interesting to me that I fleshed him out into a book. And he is a man of multitudes. He's a man of multiplicities. On the one hand, he's a loving father and husband. He owns a small auto repair shop. He is a almost savant level genius when it comes to auto mechanics and driving. But on the other hand, he is a former getaway driver. His father was a getaway driver. He has a hereditary history of violence that he does his best to try to staunch. But at the same time, he finds himself running up against circumstances that seem to force his hand, so to speak, when it comes to that other side of himself. And I wanted to give him very deep, interesting, and not easily solvable problems. I wanted to really push him as a character to see who is the real person? Is it Beauregard or is it Bug? He actually in the book differentiates between Beauregard, who he sees as his everyday loving husband and father, business owner, best friend, son, and Bug, the criminal minded getaway driver and heist wingman. And so I wanted to keep pushing him, and I don't know the answer to that question. I, I I wanted to see where the story took us and how did Beauregard answer it. But I tried to give all the characters a certain level of depth and complexity. For me, my favorite type of writing that, or favorite type of books that I love to read, are books where even the villains are interesting. They're not one dimensional. And so I tried to do that to the best of my ability. But Beauregard, I think of him in a tradition of other rough-hewn lead characters in Southern and rural fiction. He's like characters from Winter's Bone, or characters from the work of like Harry Crews or Charles Willeford. He's like he's the misfit from Flannery O'Connor, except he doesn't kill innocent people. He's sort of in that tradition. But I wanted to also examine the nuances behind crime and criminality, and for every person that you see that's a criminal or chooses an illegal path in life, there's another side that people around them know. They may know them as a humorous uncle or a loving father or a dependable, loyal friend. And so, again, to go back to what I said previously, I'm fascinated by those questions of identity. And Beauregard was a really great character to examine those questions.
Absolutely. And I think it starts out in the very beginning with a scene that kind of paints a picture that he's behind the eight ball. He's got issues. He needs money. His things are going on at the shop. I mean, he's trying to live this straight life, but he's got demands. And so you get this sense right away that he's going to have to do something, and you're afraid he's going to go the wrong route. And, he does. He has to do that. And you understand his choice, but I just think it's really interesting how you see his own conflict with having to make that choice. And I think that's really, really
I have
interesting.
a friend. I have a friend who's a writer, a writer named Kelly Garrett, who's a great writer herself, and she read an early draft of the book. And to this day, she always teases me. She's like, if he had just sold his car, that book would have been 7 pages long. And I'm like, yeah, because for those who haven't read the book, Beauregard, the only thing that he owns that belonged to his father, the only thing that he has to remember his father by, is a '71 Plymouth Duster that belonged to his dad, that was souped up, and Beauregard has repaired it and held on to it over the years. And so early on in the book, when he's facing these stark financial difficulties, his wife, because he's married in a very loving relationship, his wife begs him to sell the car. If you sell the car, we won't have to do these things. But of course, because of the because of the millstone of past memories and his inability to let go of nostalgia, he won't sell the car. It means too much to him, metaphorically and narratively. It means almost as much to him as his family, because it's the only thing that he has. He feels that he has, that connects him to his father, who has disappeared for reasons that are made clear later on in the book. But yeah, he definitely is a character that makes a lot of bad decisions for what he perceives to be the right reasons.
Yeah, you can really feel his struggle. We keep talking about his dad, and there's a lot of elements about father and son in the story. Of course, the story between Beauregard, Bug, and his dad, Ant, they called him, um, is a major piece of this. The fact that his father's missing, there was never really a formal goodbye. I mean, he knew he had to go away, but I think, Beauregard hangs on to the concept that his dad may come back. He's hoping things will clear up. But you have several statements about his dad that I wrote down because I just thought it's such a great example of your writing and just how clever you are with using words. And one of them, I'm just going to read it. It's not going to be quite the same coming out of my voice instead of yours, but in one of them, he's talking to his son, and his son asks him about his dad. And he says, my daddy was like a thunderstorm in a world of gentle breezes. That's the way he tore through life. And that's the way he raised me. Now, I just love that. It's just a great example of number one, your writing, but number two, it just tells that those sentences say so much about this relationship between Beauregard and his father. Um, anyway, I'd love for you to talk a bit about that because I think it's really important in the book. You
Yeah,
say so much about it.
yeah. The book itself is it's a I wouldn't say love letter, but it's definitely a memoir of father and son relationship. It's for me, it was a cathartic experience. My mother and father separated when I was very young, and I wasn't very close to my father for a long time. Thankfully, we've been able to find each other again and repair our relationship. And you know, those things. I think for me, and I think it resonated with other people, especially men. There is a difficulty sometimes in the way society allows men to articulate their feelings, and in the way society teaches men to express themselves. There's almost an immaturity when it comes to talking about how you feel. You know, there's a line in the book where Beauregard talks to his godfather slash uncle slash father figure, Booney, who was a friend of his dad's, and he asked him, you know, do you think he's still alive? And there's heartbreak in that. You know, I think any man who has not had a really good relationship with his father has asked that question or has felt the sentiment that's expressed by that. Um, and I really wanted to examine that and talk about the relationship between fathers and sons and the way they communicate with each other. I think in many cases, the way society views masculinity, it does a disservice to men because we're in one way we're boxed in to be strong and to be taciturn and always be, you know, this masculine ideal. But the tragedy of that is that masculine ideal also injures us spiritually, emotionally. You know, because we're not allowed to cry, we're not allowed to show emotion, you know. And so with Beauregard, he's trying so hard to not pass that on to his sons. He's trying, you know, he has a daughter from a previous relationship, and they don't have a really great relationship. So he feel like he struck out once. And so he's trying really not to saddle his children with, you know, the sins of the father onto the sons. And in some ways he succeeds, and in some ways he fails because he himself doesn't have the tools. His intent is there, his desire is there, his need and want to be a better father is there, but he doesn't have the tools to achieve that. And some of those are incidents of his own making, and some of those are systemic incidents that exist because of who he is, you know, as a black man in a small town and where he's from. I never use those things as excuses for the way Beauregard behaved, but I use them as I hope people see them um, as causations and why he makes the decisions that he makes. I don't absolve Beauregard of guilt for the illegal things or the bad poor decisions that he makes, but I do understand him, and I think when people read the entire book, they too will understand him. There's a fine line between empathy and sympathy, and I think anybody who reads the book hopefully will be empathetic to his situation. But yeah, there's a lot in there about fathers and sons. I have, I had another friend of mine who's a writer, Gabino Iglesias, said that I'm becoming the bard of broken men because I write a lot about that. It's something that obviously that is emotionally very important to me, but also thematically is very important to me.
Well, and I think it's very interesting to audiences too. I think all of us have, even as a woman, I think that the relationship with the father, and I have only brothers, but I watched my dad and his relationship with the boys versus me. You know, it is different, and I think we can all recognize something in there when we read about this. And I think you've done a good job of creating that feeling of empathy for him. Um, there's, as I said, there's a lot about fatherhood. There's a couple of other lines. I think they were great, but I'm going to let people read the book because you really do have some great ways of wording things. One thing, well, I can't resist. One thing you did say, which is short and sweet, but he's describing his dad as a ghost without a grave, and it's kind of like that was such a clear way of how his dad moves in and out of this story because he's a ghost. He's there,
Yeah,
but there's no grave. I thought, wow, that's a really great way to put that. Um, I want to
it's
talk.
funny.
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought of his. Oh no, I was just saying it's funny because I kind of thought of his dad as sort of like Hamlet's ghost in a way. That
Yeah.
he's always this presence that's floating around him. I love Shakespeare, so I definitely took that as a tiny influence. But yeah, his that presence definitely shadows Beauregard's life and his decisions.
Yeah. Well, it was such a great way to put that into words. You've got a real skill there. Speaking of skills, people are there. I had a question before we even started about this. I'm going to say the driving skills. Obviously, you either really know how to drive a car or you've done some incredible research. So, what's the story with that? Because Beauregard is something else behind the wheel.
So it's a two-part answer. I grew up in a small town where it wasn't a lot to do when I was a kid, and I had cousins. My brother and my cousin. I have an older brother. My brother and my cousins were really into cars, and so the scene at the very beginning of the book where they're at a unsanctioned drag race is basically a shot-for-shot recreation of many Saturday nights when I was a kid. I used to sneak out with my brother would leave, and then I would sneak out because my mom didn't want me to go to these drag races. So I was like 12 or 13, climbing up my window and jumping in my cousin's car. He had a 71 or 72 Maverick, and we would go over to the other side of town to this like nearly abandoned road. And for like 3 or 4 hours, guys would get together and drag race, and there'd be guys there and women there, and it was sort of this party slash competitive situation. And then as I got older, I used to have I'll tell you a funny story. I used to have an Oldsmobile Cutlass, 76 Oldsmobile Cutlass. And it was all tricked out. It had we replaced the original engine with a bigger engine and put a whole lot of fancy doodads on it. And my mom made me sell it. I was like 17 because I got 2 speeding tickets in the same day. And she was like, "You can't keep this car." And so those racing scenes are uh, some memories and some imagination of things that I've done. I also did a lot of research on the mechanical side of things as far as like I love cars. I love car culture. I love American car culture. I think there's an incredible, indelible impact that the automotive industry has made on the American psyche. Um, Regardless of your circumstances, if you can scrape the money together and you can get behind the wheel of a car, you can go anywhere in America. There are 48 continuous states that you can leave and drive through and start a new life. And I think that sense of freedom and that sense of individuality is unique to the American spirit in reference to automobiles. And growing up, I saw that. I saw, the people in my life, they love their cars. They're fascinated with cars. I grew up in very poverty stricken circumstances. And so the only thing sometimes that you have to be proud of is your automobile, and you work on it and you clean it and you wax it and you put nice rims on it and you don't want anybody to smoke in it or you don't want anybody to dent it. And so it's a mode of transportation, but it's also a symbol of your humanity. It's a symbol of your worth. And I used to see that a lot growing up. People that, like I said, my neighbors that were poor, my neighbors that were struggling to survive, but they would really go out of their way to make their car look nice. And that's not a vanity thing. Like I said, again, that's just a way to show your worth as a person. And so I love American cars. But unfortunately, I don't. I drive. People always ask me what I currently drive, and I drive a sedan. I have a Toyota Camry, but my dream car is to get like a 72 or 73 Impala and trick it out. So hopefully that'll happen. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of cars.
Well, it shows. And like I said, your driving skill and, well, just your ability to describe. There's an incredible scene. I'm not going to give it away. You got to read the book, but there's this incredible scene at the getaway. And it is so well articulated. I mean, I see it in my mind. I see that scene. And anyway, it's exciting. You do a really good job of putting those pieces together. It's very realistic. And, you know, it just takes skill to do
Thank you
that.
very much. I will tell you a secret though.
Okay.
I did actually get Hot Wheel cars and plot out the getaway scenes, the driving scenes. So I combined my love of Hot Wheel cars and my love of American muscle and my past history as a delinquent drag racer, and I kind of put all those things together. I'm so glad people respond to the driving scenes. I get a lot of emails and interaction on social media, and people really enjoy the driving scenes. So I'm glad. I love uh, chase scenes in movies. I'm a huge movie fan. So I grew up watching movies like Smokey and the Bandit and White Lightning with Burt Reynolds and all of those late 70s, early 80s sort of Southern noir B movies. And so that's sort of my homage to those movies and those actors.
Okay. I love the hot cars. Okay. That's a good one. Speaking of movies, what's the likelihood of this book becoming a movie?
Well, the movie rights actually have been sold. They were picked up late last year by a company called Picture Start, and there is a script being written as we speak by an incredible screenwriter named Virgil Williams. He is one half of the Academy Award nominated team that wrote the movie Mudbound, starring Mary J. Blige. It was nominated for an Academy Award a few years ago. So there is definitely action happening. Hopefully, we'll see a movie sooner than later. I would love to see it. Not even so much because I'm not concerned about seeing my name on the screen. I really want to see what somebody does with it as a film. Like, I want to see how the visions and the scenes in my head look on screen or on TV. So I'm fascinated with the whole process. I'm just like everybody else. I can't wait to see it.
That's well, how exciting. Well, that's very exciting. Listen, if you were to pick, who would play Beauregard?
when I was when I was writing it in my head, I saw him as uh, the actor Michael B. Jordan, and I saw his father Anthony as Idris Elba. But
Okay.
later on, a friend of mine that read the book, she said that she saw the actor Sterling K. Brown. He's on a TV show called This Is Us. He's
Yeah.
been in a few movies. He's a really incredible actor,
Yeah.
and I couldn't stop thinking of him once she said it. And then another friend, he said that he saw the actor John David Washington. So I love that people are casting their own actors in their movie that's happening in their mind. I'm just fascinated to see who plays it. I will say this since we're talking about it. When I originally wrote the book, I was visualizing, like I said, Michael B. Jordan as Bug and Idris Elba's Ant. The actor Timothy Oliphant, I was visualizing him as Ronnie,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
I saw Jared Leto as his brother Reggie, and the antagonist Lazarus Lazy Mothersbaugh. I definitely based him on the actor Walter Goggins. I was literally that's the only person I saw when I was writing that. So I would love to see maybe if any of those folks actually end up in the production. But whoever they pick, I'm sure will do a great job. But that's who I was visualizing as I wrote the book.
It's so fun to think about it. And, you know, everybody has their own picture of who that character is. So I
Yep.
like to ask that. And how exciting for you. I really, I'm going to look forward to that. I'm just going to count on it happening. How about that? Um, a couple other things I want to talk to you about. Um, there is a lot of violence in the story. Um, it's can be intense. It's intense, but it's also, this is sort of a weird thing to say. The violence is intense, but it is palatable. I mean, you can read it without closing your eyes and thinking, oh, I can't look. How do you walk that line? That's not easy.
Yeah, I've always thought that if your story earns the violence, then you can write it. And what I mean by earns it is I don't I try not to do any gratuitous violence. I don't like gratuitous violence. The scenes that I write are very visceral, but they are earned scenes. They're the natural endpoint to things that have previously happened in the book. And so, like for Bogart, once you establish that he's a character who is, like I said, very taciturn, very in control, but also is not a person to be trifled with, then the violence that he visits makes sense within the characterization that we're creating. Um, I think violence is unfortunately, a part of life. It's a bigger part of life for some people than others. And so I feel as a writer, if I write a violent scene, I will actually take the violence out and see whether the scene is still uh, it still works or not. If the scene still works without the violence, then a lot of times I'll either remove it or I'll tone it down. But if the scene contextually doesn't make sense without the violent act, then I know that it fits and it's supposed to be there. And I'm not a bloodthirsty author, but I do think when you're talking about people who are at the end of their rope, people who are desperate, people who are pressed against the wall, men and women, or even young children, I think unfortunately we all have a propensity for violence, and that propensity increases, multiplied by the desperation of our situations. I don't extol violence as a way to resolve conflicts, but I also don't shy away from it because it's real. I think all writers have different lines that they won't cross. For me, I will never hurt an animal in my writing. Um, I I tend to not write about um, graphic sexual violence. Um, and those are decisions I made as a writer. I just don't find. I don't seek the narrative. I don't seek the narrative veracity in it, and I don't want to find it. And so, but that's me. I make no judgments on anybody else. But I also feel like I'm doing a disservice to my characters if I'm not telling their complete story. And sometimes the complete story includes very, very violent acts.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think that's interesting. I definitely, I felt like the violence you had in the story was integral to the storytelling and needed to be there. But as I said, in some cases you're reading about it and you kind of think, oh no, don't go there. But I felt like it was well balanced. I wanted to talk a little bit more. We talked about our characters, talked about Bo, we talked about his dad, but let's get back to Ronnie. As I'm reading the story, I'm really picturing Ronnie. He's got quite a voice. He's just what a nutcase. And how did you come up? This guy has Elvis tattoos. Well, tell the story. Tell about Ronnie because I've never met anybody
Okay.
quite like him.
So Ronnie is actually based on a couple people I grew up with. Ronnie's a good old boy from a small southern town. He loves Elvis. He has what we call full sleeve tattoos of Elvis on both arms. He has a young Elvis all the way down to Aloha from Hawaii Elvis and everything in between. Ronnie is smarter than he thinks, but dumber than he realizes. But he's also charming in spite of himself. He's this character who's very gray. You know, he and Beauregard are both characters who are fighting severe economic circumstances. Although Ronnie's economic circumstances, negative circumstances, are really of his own making. He makes dumb decisions and he owes money to the wrong people. But I grew up with some guys like Ronnie, guys who are, could be charming in one minute, and in the next minute you want to like just knock him upside the head because, and so he became this secondary voice in the book. Where Beauregard is sort of an anti-hero that I try my best to get people to like. I wasn't necessarily trying to get people to like Ronnie. A lot of people don't, but I've had a few people that are like, that will contact me, or people I've talked to that like, oh man, that Ronnie dude, man, he's so funny. He does get the best lines. He gets the funniest lines, but he's also just another facet of the story I was trying to tell that's influenced by the my surroundings and the place I grew up. And on a more serious note, I knew, like I said, I knew a lot of guys like Ronnie who could never find themselves long enough to escape their own bad decisions. And so I kind of wanted to tell his story as well. Um, he's an interesting character. He's somebody that you think you know what's going on behind his eyes, but you really don't. And he's also a character that he's frustrating because again, he just makes some of the dumbest decisions, but he just can't help himself. That's just, that's his nature. And but even said all that, he loves his brother. He has a brother named Reggie who's a little bit younger than him, and he loves Reggie. He'll do anything to protect him. And so that bond adds, like I said, more layers to him. He's not just a secondary antagonist or a side character. He's someone hopefully with a little bit of heft and a little bit of depth, and hopefully somebody that maybe you don't identify with him, but you are intrigued to see what happens to him.
Definitely. Okay. Well, thank you for bringing us up with current with all those tattoos and such. So I want to talk. We're having a great time here. I wanted to talk a little bit about. Okay, one thing I wanted to ask you to talk about is, we are in Black History Month, and as we pause here to respect Black history and what it means in our country, and as I'm reflecting on it, I really feel that in your story. I think you bring what the impact of the history of Black lives in Southern California, Southern America. You bring that to life. Your characters are living that, and I don't know. I'd like for you to speak on that a little bit for me.
Yeah. As I said before, I'm a product of the South. I was born and raised in Virginia. Spent most of my life in this part of the country in North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina. I think for me, in to connect it to Black History Month, that there's a lot of people that seem to think that Southern fiction and Southern history is the sole provenance of some neo-Confederate apologists. And nothing could be further from the truth. The South is an incredible mixing pot of multicultural influences, African Americans, Indigenous Americans. There's a huge Hispanic culture in the South that, like I said, again, the South is, it's the story of the South is the story of America. And so for me in my writing, I strive constantly to elucidate the circumstances of African Americans living in the South in modern times. I think sometimes that, again, like I said, those stories are not told because there's a preconceived notion about the South. There's like a two-stage set of preconceived notions about the South. A lot of people think everybody in the South is dumb, and a lot of people think that the only people in the South are, Confederate flag waving good old boys, and that's not the truth. There are good old boys who don't prop up the Confederacy. There are African Americans who are Republicans. There are African Americans who are doing their best to create a life and a legacy for their children. My family goes back 6 generations in Virginia. My great grandmother was born a slave and lived long enough to see freedom. And so the land that we walk upon right now today is littered with the history and the memory and the blood of people that look like me. And so I feel like part of my duty as a writer is to tell those stories to the best of my ability, to tell the stories of African Americans, but also tell stories of the community that I grew up in. A lot of times growing up in the South, I may have more in common with a person from the South, a white guy from the South, than I may have with somebody from New York or Cincinnati or Philadelphia. And I think that the incredible stories of survival, of perseverance that exist in the South, from my family and many other African American families have an incredible resonance for our current and future situations, sociologically, politically, and in the arts and letters. I think there are great Southern writers that maybe sometimes don't get their due because they're African American. Ernest J. Gaines, an incredible writer. Alice Walker, Zora Neale Hurston, folks like that who are telling these stories way before I did. And so I feel like, again, it's my duty to try my best to continue that tradition. It's funny. I'll paraphrase what James Baldwin said. I love the South. I love being a country boy. I love growing up, with Sunday dinners after church and going down to the swimming hole and riding my bicycle down to the Tasty Freeze and picking blackberries. And because I love the South, I reserve the right to criticize her because I want her to be the best version that it can possibly be. And you don't get that unless you tell the truth. Writers writers tell lies to find the truth, and I firmly believe that. And I think as an African American man, it's my duty first as a writer to tell a good story, but it's also part of my duty as a writer, like I said, to tell the stories of the people whose voices have been silenced, and I try to do that in both ways, subtle and overt. And it does make me. I feel incredibly moved that so many people outside of the South seem to have connected with the book in a way that I intended, in ways I didn't intend. That I've gotten so much contact from people on social media how the book opened their eyes to a world they didn't know existed, a world that they didn't understand. And so, if nothing else, if that's what people take from the book at the end of the day, that means the world to me. And it makes me feel like I've done just a little bit to contribute to the furtherance of the story of the African American experience, not just in the South, but in America.
Well, thank you for doing that because I think it's important to get that voice shared. And anyway, thank you again for those comments. I want to ask you about your writing style. How do you tackle a new project?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of writer are you? Are you the type that the story drives you, or do you figure it out and drive the story? How does that work?
I'm not a pantser, as some people say. I don't write by the seat of my pants. I'm also not a complex plotter. I have friends who are writers. I have a friend named Eric Pruitt, who's a fantastic writer from North Carolina, a writer and a filmmaker. And he has this huge whiteboard in his office. I've been to his house, and he has this huge whiteboard in his office, and it's incredibly detailed and meticulous. That doesn't work for me. My mind is too disordered for that. What I do is I start out with an idea. Like, I think this idea would be cool, something that intrigues me. And then what I'll do is I'll sit down and write myself a sort of stream of consciousness synopsis where I don't put there's no grammar, there's no punctuation. I just kind of write the story out real quick, 2 or 3 pages. And I tell the beginning, the middle, and a possible ending. And once I tell myself that story, then I can take it and extrapolate it to a longer work, a book or a novella. But for me, to me, writing a book is like trying to get in a house, and I have to find the door. And if I can't find the door, then I can't tell the story. And for me, finding the door is telling myself that story, is writing a synopsis. So I use that synopsis as sort of a roadmap. Many times, the story doesn't end up where the synopsis ends up, but it gives me a jumping off point, and it gives me a way to kind of tell the story and see the beats that I want to hit, and using like a third act structure and narrative, the rise and fall of narrative action. I'm a big proponent in action, and what I mean by action, not just physical action. Something should happen in every chapter. I'm a big proponent of that. I don't like a lot of ruminating chapters. I don't like a lot of soliloquies and monologues. When you begin the chapter, something should be happening, and when you end the chapter, something should have happened. And so I think that helps with pacing. I think that helps with propulsive narration. I'm not as organized as I should be. I probably should be way more organized, but I'm just not. I do a lot of research. I love doing research. I'm one of those folks that's you know, I used to go to a lot of Trivial Pursuit games at bars before the pandemic. I have I have so many interests. But when I do write, when I sit down to write, I will put myself in my office. I'll close the door. I write with music. A lot of people don't, but I like to write with music. I make Spotify was great, a great discovery for me because I make playlists for my writing, and so and I typically write when I'm working on a project. I'll typically write anywhere from 2 to 3 hours in the morning, and then I have a day job, and then I'll come back and write 2 to 3 hours at night. Sometimes when I'm really locked in on a story, I'll write 3 or 4 hours a day in one sitting at night after I get home from work. Um, and typically I do 2 passes where I'll write the rough draft and then I'll make any necessary changes and then I'll write a second draft. Um, I don't do a lot of wholesale rewriting. Uh, it's more surgical. It's like taking some things out or adding some things here. Um, but everybody has their own process. That just seems to work for me so far. And it allows me the flexibility to see where the story goes without being beholden to an outline, but also without being, you know, kind of lost in the weeds as writing from the seat of my pants. And so that's pretty much been my technique since when I became serious about writing novels. Short stories is a whole different thing. I write short stories in like 3 or 4 hours. It's like I get an idea for a short story, and I just write it out. It doesn't take me that long to write them.
So how about your short story that you won the award for? You see that was that a quick write?
That
Yeah.
oh yeah, that started out. I used to again before the pandemic. I used to do a lot of live readings. In the crime community, there's this incredible. There was these. We do it's called Noir the Bar, where it was an event where 7 or 8 crime writers would go to a bar. We rent the bar for the night, and we get up and tell stories. And the audience, you get that great feedback from the audience. I actually originally wrote the story that won the Anthony for Noir the Bar piece, and it's about 2,000 words, and it took me about. I know it sounds terrible to say this. I wrote that story in like an hour and a half. I had the idea. I sat down and wrote it out. I rewrote it. Yeah, I rewrote it once, and then I read it. Excuse me. I read it at the Noir the Bar, and again, my friend Eric, who was actually hosting that particular event at the time, he was like, "Man, you got to try to get that published." I didn't think about getting it published. I just wrote it for that event, and I ended up sending it to an online magazine called Tough, and they published it, and then got a decent response. I didn't think about it, and then later on that year, I got the nomination, and so it was like, wow, I can't believe it got nominated. And then I had no inkling that I was gonna win. I never thought I would win. I actually went to it was nominated for the award, and I went to the convention. It's called BoucherCon. It's a huge mystery and crime fiction convention. I went to the convention in Dallas. I was so convinced I wasn't gonna win. I didn't take any dress clothes because my normal everyday attire is, black t-shirts and jeans and boots. And so I didn't take any dress clothes. And the event is at a banquet. And so when they hand out the awards, and I just wasn't that into it. I was gonna sit in the back because I figured I'm not gonna win. And a friend of mine was like, "You gotta buy a dress shirt. You're gonna win." I'm like, "I'm not gonna win." And they were like, "You gotta go buy a dress shirt." So I ran out, went to like the closest men's clothing store, got a got a dress shirt and a vest, and I bought this floppy hot hat as a joke. And I was like, I'm gonna wear it to the banquet. And they were like, don't wear the hat. And I'm gonna wear it. I'm not gonna win. And so it was this big flat floppy hat, and I won. So there's pictures of me forever into purity with this huge floppy hat and my mismatched vest and shirt combo. But it was an incredible honor to win that award. The names of the people that have won it that award in the past are, it's people like Walter Mosley and Dennis Lehane and Lee Child and Megan Abbott and Kelly Garrett and Lori Raider Day. I mean, it's a who's who of people. I'm just incredibly grateful that they bestowed that award upon me. It's heavy too. It's like a big giant paperweight. It's humongous.
You're in great company. Um, let's talk about what you have coming up. I know you have a new book coming out. You want to share
Okay.
that?
Yeah, July 6th of this year, my next novel for my publisher, the Flatiron Books. It's called Razorblade Tears, and basically it's a story of two men, one black, one white, both ex-cons, whose sons were married, and about a week after they become married, they're murdered in what appears to be a possible hate crime. And so these two men of violence, decide to investigate the crime to seek revenge for their sons, but also seek redemption for themselves because neither one of them accepted their son's sexuality or their life as they were growing up. And so they both were estranged from their boys. They both didn't understand or accept their son's sexuality or accept the love that their sons found for each other. And so it's a story about, violence and revenge and redemption. But I think it's also a story about growth and acceptance and moving forward in life. And it takes place in the South, takes place in a very similar small town to Blacktop Wasteland, although it's a standalone, so it doesn't have it's not a sequel to Blacktop Wasteland. But there are characters from Blacktop Wasteland in my previous novel, My Darkest Prayer, that are mentioned or peppered. I'm trying to create my own little shared universe. But Razorblade Tears, I'm proud of the book because I wanted to talk about prejudice and homophobia and class in a way that was palatable to people. I don't write books that are trying to preach at anybody. Nobody wants a 300-page sermon when they buy a book. So I use crime fiction because I feel like crime fiction is the most it presents the most equanimity when you're talking about stories, in my opinion. And so I use crime fiction as a way to talk about things that are important to me. And one thing that's really important to me is tolerance. I think that unfortunately in small rural towns, there's a lot of intolerance for the LGBTQ community. And that intolerance mirrors the intolerance and racism that has also plagued that region. And like I said before, I love the South, but sometimes there's parts of the South. I love the South in its beauty, and I see its grotesqueness, and so because I love it, I reserve the right to criticize it. And so that'll be out in July. Hopefully people will enjoy it. I hope they will. I don't make it sound too preachy. There's a lot of excitement and shootouts and fighting and people getting hit upside the head with garden tools. So it's not all deep, complex philosophical questions, but they're in there because I think as a writer, one of the things I try to do is to challenge myself and push myself and to talk about things that are sometimes difficult to talk about, but it's very necessary to have those conversations.
Well, you're bringing that father-son story in, definitely repeating that. So
I can't get away from it.
yeah, no, it's part of it. It's our lives, right? It's the life.
Yeah.
I know becoming an author, a published author, is never just a walk in the park. What's your path been like? What's it been like for you to get to the point where you have a book like
It was
this?
a long and circuitous, as they say, it was a long and circuitous route. I started writing. Okay, I wanted to be a writer ever since I was 5 years old. My mother used to read to me a lot of different stories. If you listen to my mom, she said I started reading when I was 4, but I don't believe that. But she would read to me a lot of different stories. She loved Greek mythology. She loved the Grimm fairy tales and Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. And she would read those to me. And sometimes I didn't like the endings. And I would complain about it. Even then, I was looking at plot holes. And so one night she's like, if you really don't like the books that I read to you, why don't you write your own story? You can make the ending whatever you want. And I was like, I'll take that challenge. And I wrote this story at 5 years old about these elves that live in the magnolia tree outside of our window. And this is whole thing with that. There was these elves and they were fighting these fairies and it was a war and there's multiple generations. And anyway, I got bitten by the writing bug and I always wanted to be a writer. And then when I was in high school, I met a teacher named Jeffrey Bone, who he really just saw something in me and nurtured that in me to a great extent. He gave me the Elements of Style by Strunk and White. He gave me the collected works of Samuel Beckett to read. These were books outside of our regular syllabus in high school. And he really just believed in me as a writer and was always so supportive of me. And so I went to college. Unfortunately, I had to drop out of college. My mother became very ill and I had to come home and help her. But I always kept writing. And in my 20s, I really concentrated on trying to write horror and sci-fi. But when I look back on it now, even my horror and sci-fi always had a crime fiction patois, so to speak. And I didn't get a lot of success. I got a lot of rejections. I got a lot of rejections. I didn't sell a story until I was 33. And I sold my first crime story when I was 33 years old. And that's an interesting story how that happened. So what happened was, and that's how all great stories start. What happened was I had a friend who was a belly dancer, and she went to New York City and she did a show. And after the show, her and her troupe went to this bar in the West Village, and the bartender was a guy named Todd Robinson. His job was a bartender, but he also published a quarterly magazine of crime fiction called Thug Lit. And she told him about me, and he gave her his email. He said, "Hey, when you get back, tell your friend if he wants to try to publish a crime story, let me know." And I had never written a crime story because I didn't think I had it in me to write it, because all my experiences were small town experiences. And I learned from writers like I mentioned earlier, Daniel Woodrell and Harry Crews and Charles Williford and some of the Southern writers like Flannery O'Connor, that you can write about Southern, that small towns, you can explore the same issues that exist in big cities. And so I wrote this story and I sent it in, and he published it as my first paying story. And then it just went on from there. I wrote more and more crime stories. I got published in multiple anthologies and magazines, and eventually I went from writing short stories to writing a book. My first book is a mystery, a Southern mystery called My Darkest Prayer, and it's published by a small independent publisher out of Maryland called Intrigue Publishing. Great small independent publisher. But that book, I had gotten an agent. I got an agent based on my stories in Thug Lit. An agent reached out to me, really liked my writing style. And we just weren't a good fit. The agent and I, really great folks, but we just weren't on the same page. And they sent the book out and it got rejected like 63 times. And it was funny because the agent kept like copying me in on the rejection letters. And at one point I was like, "Hey man, I get it. You ain't gotta, you don't have to copy me in anymore. I understand." But anyway, he and I parted ways. And I went to a live reading in D.C., in Washington, D.C., met the folks at Intrigue, Austin and Denise Camacho, and they published My Darkest Prayer, and it came out, and it did really well. For an independent book, it did really well. Got a lot of, I think it still has like a 4-star review on Amazon out of like 150, 200 reviews. And so anyway, I published that book, and to support that book, I went to the 2018 BoucherCon convention as a fan, just as a fan. Paid my own way, saved my money, and went down there. And when I got down there, I was talking to my friend Eric, who was the host or moderator for a panel. There was going to be a panel discussion about Southern crime fiction. And he asked me did I want to be on the panel. And I said no, because I've only got one book and it isn't out yet. And I haven't really written that much. And he said, "No, but you deserve to be on this panel because you're a really good writer." And so he got me on the panel, and I was on the panel with some great writers like Ace Atkins, who writes the Quinn Colson series, but he also writes the Robert B. Parker Spencer series, Steph Post, who's a great writer out of Southern Florida, and Alice Segura, and of course my friend Eric was there as well, Eric Pruitt. So anyway, we had this really incredible discussion on the panel. It was just an enlightening discussion for me. And afterwards, I was walking through the lobby, and a guy comes up to me. He says, "Hey, my name is Josh Getzler. I'm an agent. Are you represented by anybody?" I said, "No, currently I'm not." He said, "Well, look, I really like the things that you were saying on that panel. Here's my card. When you get home, if you're working on anything, send it to me." I said, "Well, I just finished this I said, this Southern heist novel called Blacktop Wasteland. He said, well, yeah, when you get back, send it to me. So that was in the fall of 2018. I sent it to him in December of 2018. He took me on as a client and he sold it to Flatiron Books in February of 2019 for a 2-book deal. And it came out in July of 2020. And so I've been writing since I was 20. I'm 47. I'm a 27-year overnight story. So
Well, I just can't thank you enough for spending the time with us tonight. And, I know I'm going to look back sometime, probably not too far off in the future, and say to somebody, I got to interview S.A. Cosby, and it was quite an event. So I just want to wish you the best and success with your writing, success with the movies. And just again, thank you for joining us tonight. It was just a big treat. Jeff, did you have anything else?
I have so many comments, but I don't want to backtrack too much.
I bet you can't wait to read the book now.
The one overriding one is you have such a penchant for titles and phraseology, and I haven't read the book. Do not let them change the name of your book for the movie. That is such a fantastic capturing title. It'll get everybody going. And what's the other one? Razor Blade Tears.
Yeah.
How awesome is that?
Yeah.
War of the Bar. It's just awesome. Yeah, you could do that and make
Thank you
money.
so much.
But I do have one question. You at one point during the interview with Ruthie, you said, "When I get home from work," what's that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So my day job is I am an attendant at a funeral home. That's my day job.
So you have a day
I used to
job.
work, but I've had a ton of jobs. I was a retail manager for a hardware store for 11 years. I was a bouncer for a nightclub while I was doing that. I used to work as a mate on a charter boat in Florida. In my 20s, when I came out of college, after my mother got a little better, I did a whole Jack Kerouac thing. Do not do this, kids, but I hitchhiked and rode buses from Virginia to New Mexico. And along the way, I did little odd jobs here and there, did some as a day laborer and all that kind of stuff. So I've had a ton of different jobs. And hopefully, the way the stuff with my current writing is going, I'll be able to quietly retire from my day job here soon, hopefully. But it's been great. My boss is real flexible because my wife is my boss. So she owns the funeral homes. I help her out. And so she gives me all the days off I want. Yeah, it's funny. I tell people all the time when they talk about my writing and the stuff that's going on with the books and the career and everything, 70% of being a writer is just perseverance. It really is. It's just sticking around. It's sticking around. It's there are a lot of gates that you have to get through to be a published author, but you'll never get through the first one if you don't hang around long enough. And I think, and it's hard. Rejection is so personal. It really is. Writing is like telling yourself a joke for 12 months and then hoping everybody else gets the punchline. And if they don't, it feels so personal. They write a rejection letter and you look at it and you're like, wow, you don't know that I stayed up for like almost 12 hours trying to fix this segment in the book, or I was, looking through all my thesauruses to try to find the right word, or I read a whole book about how to pick locks to make sure that my character, would be able to converse about it convincingly. And so it's so personal. If anybody's watching that wants to be a writer, the biggest piece of advice I can tell you is to persevere, but don't take things personal. Don't. I work with a lot of different editors, and editors are really great people. They can get on your nerves sometimes, but they're really great people. Don't take it personal. Don't take rejection personal. Many times, a rejection doesn't mean your story is poorly written or isn't interesting. It just may not fit for that particular market or that particular person. So that's the biggest thing I can tell you. Develop a thick skin. It's a business, so please don't take it personal. But write with passion.
Apparently, networking is really important too, based on what you told us tonight.
Oh yeah.
Running into the right people and
persistence
too. I know we're running a little long, but can you just tell us the story that you told us about the bars and you went in and who you met there real quick? When you were
Okay,
reserving when you were reserving your table, you were at a conference,
yeah.
a
So
writers conference.
so at 2018, yeah, at the Writers Conference 2018 VoucherCon, it's a huge mystery conference, and it's a wonderful conference because it's very personal, it's very laid back. So you'll see really famous mystery writers just kind of walking around. And so when I got there, I have a group of friends that were all writers that are trying to get out there. And like I said, I mentioned my friend Eric before. There's a great writer named Ashley. God, and I can't think of her name. She's gonna kill me. But I have a great friend. I have a lot of friends who are writers who are on as we say on the come up. And so I'm at this convention, and my friend Eric's like, "Hey, I'm gonna go round up Ashley and Krista, Faust, and all these other folks that are friends of ours, and we're gonna start drinking because 50% of writing conferences is hanging out with your friends at the bar." So he was like, "I'm gonna go get everybody." I said, "Well, look, you do that. I'm gonna hold this table that's near the bar." It was like a big round top bench table, and I'm gonna hold this table. So I'm standing there at the table, kind of stretching my hands out so nobody sits down. And there's this very tall Englishman that walks up to the bar. He's like 6'7", 6'8", very slim, very wiry Englishman. This bar is huge. It's a humongous bar in Florida, and he's trying to get the bartender's attention. And he's very light and in a very English voice. So he's like, "Excuse me, pardon me, excuse me, pardon." And she can't hear him. And so I said, "You trying to get her attention?" And he's like, "Yeah, I want a drink." I said, I'll get her. And I have a deep voice. So I yelled, I was like, "Excuse me." And then she turns around and she comes over and she gets the guy a drink. He's like, "Oh, I have to get you a drink." I said, no big deal. I'm waiting for my friends to come back. Don't worry about it. And we get to talking. He said, no, I've got to buy you a drink. And as he's talking to me, our friends walk up and all of their eyes just get big as dinner plates. And finally, one of them steps forward. He says, you know Lee Child?" And I said, "No, but I hope he's here because I want him to sign my book." And this very tall Englishman taps me on the shoulder, and I look up, and he's like, I'm Lee Child." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it." And it's like, I'm such a huge fan. And he was so nice. He talked to us about 20, 30 minutes. He bought us all drinks, bought us a round of really, really good scotch. And he was just so nice and so gracious. And he's very funny. He's a very funny guy. And it was just a wonderful experience. And it's one of those things I always cherish. And he actually gave me a blurb for Blacktop Wasteland. He actually gave me a really good blurb for it. And so that's like you said, networking is a big part of it, but also as a writer, I think it's important to have other writers that you're comfortable with, that you're close to, because writing can be such a solitary endeavor. You don't do it alone, but you also do it by yourself, if that makes sense. And so it's good to have a writer that you can call up and say, "Hey, my man," or "Hey, buddy, can you look at this? I'm working on this. Do you think this works?" Or something, you just call them up and, a story's not going well and I just kind of want to talk it out. It's good to have people who understand where you're coming from, because the people in your life that aren't writers, they love you and they care about you. But there's a unique, there's a special group that sit down in front of a laptop or sit down with a notebook and create worlds. And sometimes only people that are in that group can understand what you're going through. And I'm very, very blessed that I have some really good writers who are really good friends in my life. Eric Pruitt, Kelly Garrett, Nikki Dolson, Rob Hart, people that I can talk to about anything, not just writing, but how writing affects my life and how my life is affected by writing. And I think that's important too. And they'll always be your cheerleaders. They're always going to be in your corner. If somebody isn't happy for you the way you're happy for them, that's not somebody you need to have in your life. And so it's been an incredible blessing for me to have those people, in addition to my family and friends that aren't in the writing biz. But I tell you the truth, it's funny. I talked about all those jobs. I've had a bunch of other jobs I didn't mention. I don't think I've been really good at very many of them. Writing is the one thing that I feel like I'm really good at. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I don't mean that in a facetious way. It feels so natural for me to tell a story. I really believe that you can tell somebody the mechanics of writing. You can teach somebody verb, subject, agreement. You can teach somebody how to diagram a sentence. but you can't teach anybody how to be a storyteller. I think you either have it or you don't. And some of the best storytellers I've ever met in my life never put pen to paper. And so, you know, I grew up around uncles and aunts and cousins who were great backyard orators and great cookout philosophers, and I absorbed all of that, and so it's something that I'm very, very lucky I was able to experience. But writing is the one thing, it's always been there for me. I hope it always is. It gives me peace. It allows me to express myself. It allows me to really look at the world and talk about things that are important to me in a way that is, I think, hopefully interesting, not just to myself, but to other people. So I want to just say thank you to you guys for having me. This has been an incredible experience. I'm so grateful that you guys reached out. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's been a thrill for me. I'll let Ruthie wrap up. Thank you very much from me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I mentioned this to SA when we had a chance to talk. The initials say it all. You're a writer, SA. Come on, SA. Let's celebrate that. I think that's very cool. Anyway, it's been a big treat, and you're my favorite kind of author. You just love to talk about what you're doing. You're a natural. I feel like you're telling a story when you answer the question. So anyway, thank you for being such a great participant, and I hope we get to see you again. I'm going to put down, you know, this next book on my calendar, and don't be surprised if we don't reach out. You might be too busy to do this, but anyway, it's been fun, and thank you so much.
I would love to come back. Thank you guys so much. Thank you everyone for that was in attendance. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
You got to remember all those names.
Good night, everybody.
Up on the dais for the Academy Award.
Yes.
when your
never forget them.
Made into a movie and it wins an Academy Award. Anyway, thank you. Good night.
Thank you guys.
Everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.